The passing of one of SeaWorld's OG dolphins. After 50 years of that dolphin's imprisonment, yet another reason not to go to SeaWorld. Next on the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, the dolphin named Notchfin died a few weeks ago in March. SeaWorld called the dolphin one of its founding members of its San Antonio park. But imagine the cruelty that Notchfin endured for 50 years. I talked with PETA's Melanie Johnson, Senior Manager of Animals and Entertainment, about Notchfin and about SeaWorld in general, and why it still shouldn't be on your list of places to visit anytime soon. That's on this episode of the PETA Podcast with Emil Guillermo.
SeaWorld has 18 orcas left, and they have over 100 other dolphins. So that includes bottlenose dolphins and Pacific white-sided dolphins, about a dozen beluga whales.
So those are the main ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
People typically just associate SeaWorld with orcas. They don't think about the hundreds of other animals that SeaWorld confines to tiny tanks and forces to perform, like the dolphins, belugas, fish. SeaWorld doesn't use fish in shows. They're really just in, a tank for display. Along with, they also have penguins who are in tanks on display. They're not typically used in shows like the dolphins and whales are.
They imprison all these different species, and that's what it is. It's a prison.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so tell me about Notchfin. Am I gendering him correctly? She. Oh, forgive me. I should have asked for her pronouns. But she was 63. That's a long time. Did she have offspring?
She did. So Notchfin was she was held in tiny tanks for 50 years. She was used as a breeding machine. She had babies and grandbabies as well, who were also exploited by SeaWorld. And so she really suffered nearly her entire life in SeaWorld's tiny tanks, just to be used for breeding and for performing.
And all right, so you're breeding. I mean, I guess there's no love relationship in that equation. I mean, she didn't have a spouse.
Right. And in their natural homes in the ocean, dolphins can choose their own mates. But at SeaWorld, they're used in SeaWorld's sorted dolphin breeding program, where female dolphins are often torn out of the water. They may be drugged, so they can't fight back. They're stuffed into these foam cells, and then they're forcibly inseminated. And then when they have the babies may, they may die prematurely. They may go to different parks. And if they survive, then they just are in for a lifetime of suffering, just like their mothers.
I mean, that's a sad thing. I mean, because when you think of them as while, in prison and the difference in their lives in nature, in their natural setting, it's complete. You see how totally cruel it is to have them do this. And she was essentially a breeding machine for SeaWorld for 50 years, you said?
Notchfin was captured in 1975, and then she was held in tanks at different parks throughout her life. And during some of that time, she was used as a breeding machine.
It's like her bad luck that she gets caught, because the ones that get away are lucky because they could live their lives. But the ones who don't, they get incarcerated for for decades. I mean, is that really the unlucky story of Notchfin?
Yeah, it is. She was just one of the hundreds of unlucky dolphins to be abducted, torn away from her family, her home, and then imprisoned in a concrete cell for the rest of her life. The same thing happened to orcas decades ago. Luckily, that doesn't happen anymore, at least in the US. In Japan, dolphins are still being abducted every year. Some of them are slaughtered, and then the other ones are sent to marine parks around the world to be used in shows.
And just to finish up on the breeding aspect, she has babies and the babies have babies. There's a legacy. Her babies end up with the same fate. They're imprisoned and destined to do these shows for SeaWorld.
That's exactly what SeaWorld's breeding program is. They use dolphins as breeding machines to create generations of animals who they can exploit.
And does she ever experience being family or being with her grandchildren, her offspring?
The animals at SeaWorld, when they have babies, sometimes they are allowed to remain together, but other times they are, or have been shipped to other parks. So they never get to experience what a normal mother-child bond should be, in the ocean where dolphins could swim up to 60 miles a day. Orcas can swim up to 150 miles a day, and they just don't have that. They're not allowed to stay with their families, their pods.
But the whole idea of a natural dolphin life, it's just foreign to them. I mean, they don't get a chance.
For some of the dolphins who were abducted and then imprisoned, they know what life was like in their natural homes, but then that was stripped away from them. So they don't have that anymore. And then the animals who were bred at SeaWorld, they'll never know what it's like to swim in the ocean, to feel waves, to feel the salt water, to be able to forage for food, swim as far as their heart's desire. They'll never know that as long as SeaWorld keeps imprisoning them.
Yeah, a totally unnatural life, which makes it, their imprisonment there at SeaWorld more cruel. You realize, and if you understand that story, maybe you can begin to empathize and see why it really is unjustified to go in there and pay money to see and watch these animals entertain anyone.
Exactly.
The idea of Notchfin, 63, a founding member, and we talked about how there are these different, essentially, inmates in the SeaWorld entertainment scheme. But what is the difference between a dolphin and an orca? Describe the basic differences. I mean, I know what a dolphin is. I know it from watching Flipper, right? And seeing those pictures. But orcas, they kind of look like they have the white, right? And they have a fin, but the dolphins are more smooth skinned. I don't know. How would you describe the difference to people? Say, Notchfin was a dolphin, not an orca. How would you describe that?
That's a good question. And actually, a lot of people don't know that orcas are dolphins. They're in the dolphin family. So Notchfin was a bottlenose dolphin, and that's the type of dolphin that most people think of when they hear the word dolphin. They are much smaller than orcas. They're gray, and like you said, orcas are black and white, but they're all part of the same family. They all swim in pods in the ocean, swim for dozens and dozens of miles, and both of them are exploited for entertainment in marine parks like SeaWorld.
You can swim with the dolphins, or you can actually get on a dolphin or an orca, or how does that work? How do they exploit them at SeaWorld in that way?
So not only are the dolphins kept in these tiny concrete tanks for decades. Or not only are they forced to perform tricks for audiences who are laughing and jeering, but they also are sometimes forced to swim with humans. And so dolphins are, they're wild animals. They naturally avoid humans. So it's incredibly stressful for them to have to be in close contact with humans, but it's also dangerous to both the dolphins and humans because diseases can be passed from one to the other. Dolphins have bitten and broken humans' hands. And just last week, a swim with the dolphins encounter in Jamaica where a woman landed on the dolphin's dorsal fin and ended up in the emergency room in Jamaica. So this just really shows that these are dangerous to everyone involved.
Animals shouldn't be used for entertainment, but it's dangerous. It's risky. It's not like 100% safe for humans, for anyone, really.
Right.
You mentioned disease, and that's one of the things about being incarcerated in a place like SeaWorld, that there was this quote from a press release that SeaWorld put out about the death of Notchfin, and they said, the fact that she lived to age 63 is testament of the expert care and the deep bond she formed. But there weren't really deep bonds, and if there were bonds, they were natural bonds. They weren't, natural bonds with, her family, of dolphins. But what about this treatment, testament of expert care? Did she die of natural causes? There's so much disease that is spread in those kind of confined spaces like they have at SeaWorld. Do we know how she died?
I don't believe the necropsy report for Notchfin has been released yet. The vast majority of animals who die at SeaWorld die years or even decades short of their natural life expectancies. In San Diego, actually, 3 newborn dolphins have died since November. They were so young, they weren't even given a name. And SeaWorld never announced anything. We just found it in the Marine Mammal Inventory report that these dolphins have died. And then, female orcas can live until they're 80 in their natural homes, but most of the orcas at SeaWorld don't even make it until their teens.
Wow. So 63, it seems long. They called her this is one of the originals, the OGs of SeaWorld. But in fact, she was at least 20 years short of a normal life expectancy for a dolphin. Although for an incarcerated dolphin, 63 is a long time, as you point out.
But if you think about it, just like 50 years of misery, so she just suffered longer than most dolphins. It's certainly not a victory that she lived to be 63 years old. It's really the complete opposite, just how long she suffered in SeaWorld's tanks for.
Yeah, and what about this idea of, they called it, she lived that long because it's a testament of the expert care. Do we know the kind of care the dolphins really get? Dolphins and orcas and all the other animals there. Is it, I'm sure they have vets come in, but as you say, there are animals that die far short of their life expectancy. And even Notchfin was far short of a natural life expectancy for a dolphin.
Yeah, and there's just no amount of expert care that could, account for how much shorter these animals live in marine parks than they would live in their natural homes. Just the general stress of confinement, of imprisonment, the diseases, the animals attack each other out of frustration, just all of that. It just makes it, so difficult for them to even reach their natural life expectancy.
Now, I have this excellent book that was put out by Captain Paul Watson and Tiffany Humphrey called Orcapedia, and it lists all the, captured and victimized and imprisoned not dolphins, but orcas. And I guess they don't have they could, but, no one's put out a dolphinpedia yet. But if you were to look at the resume of Notchfin, Notchfin died at the San Antonio SeaWorld, and there are a number of SeaWorlds across the country. Was she constantly transferred, and does that transferring have an impact on their life expectancy and on the quality of life that they can sustain?
Transferring dolphins, orcas, and other animals between parks, that certainly reduces their quality of life. I can't even imagine how stressful it would be to be, loaded up, shipped across the country multiple times. Some of the animals at SeaWorld, some of the orcas, they've gone back and forth between parks nearly a dozen times. That certainly can't be helpful for their life expectancy. If they had been with their family to begin with, then they were separated away from them. Yeah, it's just really difficult. SeaWorld treats these animals like they're just chess pieces that they're just moving around whenever they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the resume of one dolphin, Duncan, who died in 2019, how he was shifted from San Antonio to Cleveland to Orlando to Cleveland to Orlando to San Diego, back to, used in a U.S. Navy program and then back to SeaWorld. I mean, it sounds like almost like a professional baseball player, the way they trade him around. I can't imagine there's a kind of stability that would make a difference in the dolphin's life.
Once they get used to one place, then, they're shipped to another place. If they form bonds with the animals at that park, then I can't even imagine how hard that would be to have to leave them and then go into a new facility with all new animals. And that's part of the reason why these animals are attacking each other. They're stressed, they're frustrated, they have nowhere to go, nowhere to escape. And you're putting these animals who would live in different populations in their natural homes, you're putting them all together. So it's no wonder why they don't get along.
So let's talk about what happens now to Notchfin.
Yeah, we will be keeping an eye out for the necropsy. It should be added to the marine mammal inventory report, and we always keep an eye out on that. That's how we find out about a lot of these animal deaths that SeaWorld doesn't want people to know about.
What's the inventory as we speak? How many animals are in prison now?
So it only accounts for the US, and there are just hundreds on top of hundreds of dolphins and other marine mammals right now in marine parks like SeaWorld, but also, other facilities like the Miami Seaquarium, Gulf World, other marine parks as well.
When Blackfish came out, a lot of people that was when they first were introduced to the reality of what happens to marine mammals like dolphins and orcas. And the protest has gone on. SeaWorld has had some ups and downs, mostly downs, but they seem to have made a comeback. What is the current status of the health of the park to weather the public protests? How is SeaWorld doing? It sounds like they keep on no matter what, even though they might change the emphasis from animal shows to rides and roller coasters and that kind of thing. What is the status now since Blackfish?
So after Blackfish came out, SeaWorld's attendance plummeted. Understandably, SeaWorld agreed to stop breeding orcas. Of course, that does nothing for the other dolphins that SeaWorld still breeds that we talked about earlier. And since then, SeaWorld has shifted its focus a little bit away from the animal aspect and more onto non-animal rides, events, roller coasters, and other forms of entertainment. So they know that that's what the public wants. But unfortunately, the public sees this and thinks that SeaWorld either doesn't have animals anymore or they've changed. And so some people are still going to SeaWorld just for the rides. And so they don't understand that purchasing a ticket, even if you're not seeing the animals, is keeping SeaWorld's animal abusing company in business.
And so really it's ongoing. People should not go and patronize SeaWorld, because eventually all that money that they spend there ends up, keeping and sustaining the cruelty in these animal prisons.
And so that's what a large focus of PETA's SeaWorld campaign is just educating the public, letting them know SeaWorld still has orcas and other dolphins. They're still forcibly breeding dolphins. There are 18 orcas, more than 100 other dolphins in these tiny concrete tanks. They have nothing to do but swim in endless circles or float listlessly at the surface of their tanks. So we're really trying to get people to know that, so then they can decide not to go to SeaWorld, because no one would want to go there if they knew what was really happening to these animals.
All right, now I'm going to play devil's advocate, so you don't get mad at me. But,
Okay.
it looks like they're having fun. They're swimming. They're out there in the sun, and it's wet, and they're wet, and people come up and pet them and rub their hands on them. And that's not good. That shouldn't happen.
The tanks at SeaWorld, I believe the orca tank, its maximum depth is around 35 feet, but orcas in the wild can dive 3,500 feet. So just, they're in these tanks that are like the size of a bathtub for them. So there's just no way that could ever be humane or enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, these animals are big. Now, you say notchfin, the dolphin, was smaller compared to an orca, but give me an average size of an orca again. It's like they're large.
Yeah, like 20 feet long, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. They're very large animals. So SeaWorld's tanks, they're actually like not even enough in some parts for the orca to just dive at all.
So it's sort of like me in my podcast closet here. I mean, it'd be, although not that funny, I mean, but yeah, I'm confined. But how about the dolphins? They're smaller, but I guess then they just jam more dolphins into the same tank, or?
Yep, exactly. There are about 100 dolphins crammed into just 7 concrete tanks at SeaWorld. So you can just imagine there's no room to escape from other dolphins. There's nothing to do besides just swim in the same circle over and over and over again for the rest of their lives.
It'd be interesting to see if there was, I guess, a dolphin's mental health. Is there any way that you can gauge that? I guess if they can get sick, or does anyone are there any records, or does anyone ponder that?
The animals at SeaWorld do display signs of psychological distress. So orcas have been seen bobbing their heads up and down. They've been seen gnawing on the concrete sides of their tanks, hitting the tanks, and then just swimming in circles is also a sign of distress. So these animals are clearly in distress.
Yeah. And I guess there's no report about, what happened to Notchfin. There was no ongoing, study of her, or they weren't monitoring her. Just one day she showed up on the inventory list as a number of a dolphin that had passed on, right?
Yep, exactly. SeaWorld just treats these animals as numbers, as a way to make a profit. They don't treat them as all these individuals, these intelligent, complex animals who have their own needs.
Now, is there a way, say, if PETA and others were able to free, I know there are efforts to try to send these marine mammals to sanctuary. Is that successful, even at a late time? I mean, if someone was able to get notchfin out of there and put notchfin in a sanctuary, say 5 years ago, it probably would have extended her life, no?
Yeah, I would think so. There's a seaside sanctuary in Iceland where 2 beluga whales who were in a marine park in China were sent. So they are living their lives in a much more natural environment. The Whale Sanctuary Project announced plans to create a sanctuary in Canada, and the National Aquarium in Baltimore is building a seaside sanctuary for the dolphins in its care currently.
So that's kind of an option to get to free these marine mammals, but it's not easy, and I guess it's kind of limited in terms of the space, and SeaWorld doesn't want to give up their animals. Is it really a possibility to get more of these animals into sanctuary?
It is a possibility. Like I mentioned, those 2 belugas are in the sanctuary now. Unfortunately, Lolita plans were in place to send her to a sanctuary, but she passed away before that happened. But that was in the works. The public was outraged when Lolita died. And so I think a lot of that shifted to Corky, the orca at SeaWorld, and the other orcas. And people now really want to see them in seaside sanctuaries like Lolita was supposed to be before it's too late. But another thing is SeaWorld can easily just stop breeding dolphins and whales, and then move the existing ones to seaside sanctuaries.
I guess that's sort of the ideal thing right now. If you cut off the supply, stop the breeding, stop, they're not, capturing any out in the wild, deal with what they have, and then slowly whittle down to just a SeaWorld with rides and no prison.
And PETA would wholeheartedly support a SeaWorld that had no animals, just the fun rides, events, and all of those things that people love without the animal cruelty.
And maybe some vegan food too.
Yes.
Definitely some vegan food. All right. So tell me what people can do to get to that ideal world. What do you suggest that people listening who are PETA supporters, PETA members, are just lovers of orcas and dolphins and want to do something in the name of poor Notchfin, who died, recently, March 14th, she died. What can people do if they feel moved? What would be an appropriate thing that would move us forward?
I would say the best thing that anyone can do is, first of all, of course, never go to SeaWorld, but then tell everyone you know to never go to SeaWorld. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't even know that SeaWorld still has animals. So getting the word out is really the most important thing so that we can lower SeaWorld's attendance, and then they'll have no choice but to stop breeding dolphins and send the animals to sanctuaries.
PETA's Melanie Johnson, Senior Manager of Animals and Entertainment, on the death of Notchfin and why SeaWorld shouldn't be on your list of places to visit anytime soon. Go to PETA.org for more. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link to this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on X at Twitter at Emil Amok, EMILAMOK, see me at amok.com, or find this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. That's EMILAMOK 1. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And once again, thank you. Thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It's important. You got to rate and review the show. It helps get the word out. about the issues you care about. We've got 8 seasons, and you can add your voice by rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Hey, join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.